And some people would hear that, they're like, but I believe. That's good. Belief is only part of it though. That belief also must move to obedience. Now, does it just mean that because they believed that God was going to do it for them, that they had nothing that they were going to do? It's not what it says. It's not what it says. That's what some people think. They're like, well, I just believe in God, and so he should do whatever I tell him. Well, I believe in God, which means I don't have to do anything for the rest of my life. I prayed the prayer when I was 10. I'm good. Is that enough? Is belief enough? No, you need belief and obedience. Jesus says it like this: if you love me, then you will obey me. And if you're not obeying him, you have to question whether or not you really love him. Because faith is evidenced by your obedience. The walls wouldn't have fell just by their faith alone. It also fell because they obeyed the commands that God had told them to do. Look what it says in Hebrews 11:30, just the other section of it. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell. By faith, I believe, I believe. When did the walls fall? Before or after? After they did what? After they encircled the city for 7 days. After you obey, that's when you see God move. See, there's a lot of people who they don't like after. No, they don't like after. They say, God, if you do this, then I'll do this. Quid pro quo with God. Right, God, if you come through for me here, then I'm going to do this. God, if you just come through in my family, then I'm going to start going to church. God, if you just give me a raise at work, then I'm going to start giving to the Be Bold giving campaign. If I get some more money, then I'm going to be more generous. I've discovered that that's not how it works. Right? I've just discovered that if you're not generous now, you won't be generous then. You'll just spend more money. But that's what people want. They say, God, if you do this for me, then I'm going to do this for you. God, if you come through in this situation, then I'm going to start loving my wife. Then I'm going to start serving my kids. Then I'm going to go to next steps next week. But first, you have to do some things for me. And people get so frustrated with God. And they look up, they say, God, why aren't you doing the things that I told you to do? And I have to wonder if God's up in heaven saying, I was thinking the same thing about you. Why aren't you doing the things that I told you to do? I want to be good to you. I want to bless you. I want to show myself faithful to you. I want to work in your life. But first, you got to listen and obey me. Because faith is evident by your obedience. It's not until after they walked around the walls for 7 days did they actually see the breakthrough in their life that they were hoping to see. But let me just go ahead and just tell you something straight up. God's going to ask you to do some weird things. That's right. Some things that on the surface, they just don't make sense. I mean, how many of you are reading this story and you're like, this doesn't make any sense? Like they had to walk around one time for 6 days, and on the 7th day, they had to walk around 7 times. Why couldn't they just walk around 7 times the first day? Just take a shortcut. But so many people want shortcuts to God's miracles. You can't take a shortcut. It takes time. It takes patience. It takes faith, and it takes obedience. So they had to walk around. Could you just imagine what it would have been like to be one of the soldiers in Israel? Can you imagine what it would have been like? Like, all right, we're going to war. What are we going to do? They're like, well, you're going to walk around this city for 6 days, one time. And on the 7th day, you're going to walk around it 7 times. You say, is that it? Like, no, there's going to be priests behind you blowing a trumpet. Well, that's not going to work. Well, that's what God told us to do. And so we're just going to be obedient to whatever God told us to do. It's just imagine that soldier coming home, right? He gets back to his tent, and his wife's like, hey, honey, how are you doing? They're like, I walked around the city today. Did the walls fall? No. Yeah, I don't know if this is going to work. Well, I'm just doing whatever God told me to do. I said, well, what are you going to do tomorrow? I think we're just going to walk around a city again. Oh, well, what are you going to do the next day? I think we're just going to do it again. And we're going to do it again and again. But on the 7th day, it says walk around 7 times and it's going to fall. Well, good luck with that. Right? It sounds crazy. But for those of you who are new to faith, let me go ahead and just take the mystery of following Jesus out and tell you up front, God's gonna ask you to do some crazy things sometimes. Right, God's gonna ask you to do some crazy things. I mean, crazy things like tithing. It's weird, like, you mean to tell me that if I give 10% to God, I can do more on 90% than I can do on 100%? Yes. Yeah, that's true. Sure, but it doesn't make sense. Okay, it's because God uses a different math than we do. Right, you mean to tell me that if I go to church with my family every single week, that I have a 50% greater statistical variable to not end up in divorce? Yeah. So you mean if I do marriage counseling for 6 weeks with a pastor or a leader in the church, I reduce my divorce rate by 45%? Yes. So you mean to tell me that if I read my Bible every single morning and I pray every single day, then you mean to tell me that that is going to lead to a greater influence in my children's lives? And they have less risks of alcoholism, drug addiction, and eating disorders? Yes. You say, but I'm only doing 10 minutes in the morning. How does 10 minutes in the morning prevent them a lifetime of pain? It's because God's ways are not our ways. God's gonna ask you to do some crazy things, but here's what I've discovered, is that God's ways are not our ways because they're better. They're better than what we would do on our own. God's ways are not our ways. Instead, they are better. And following Jesus, there's gonna be some crazy things that God's gonna ask you to do. Like, I'll just give you a couple of examples. Like, for one, not too long ago, as you might have remembered, as we were working on buying the new building, the lender told us this. He said, hey, Byron, great news. We're gonna offer this loan to buy the building, 0 down. I was like, 0 down? I can afford that. And then with the rising cost of construction and the state of the economy that we're in, they called back and they said, hey, bad news. It's gonna actually be 60,000 down. We had to change the rates. And I thought, 60,000 down? I don't have that. But while I didn't have the money, here's what I did have. I had the faith. I had the faith that God was gonna do something, that God was going to answer our prayers. And so here's what we did. We called for a 3-day fast. On first Wednesday in August, we called for a 3-day fast. For some of y'all, that was your first time to fast. Up until this point, you've only ate fast food, you never fasted food. But we prayed and we prayed and we prayed for 3 days. And you know what God did at the end of that 3 days? Nothing. It was like we were just walking around the city, right? We walked around the first time. What happened? Nothing. What happened the second time? Nothing. What happened the fifth time? Nothing. What happened the sixth time? Nothing. Nothing was happening in the natural, but I can guarantee you something was happening in the supernatural. That even though we don't see it, God is still doing something. The Bible says that faith is the evidence of things that are unseen, and that we do not wage war with the weapons of this world, but instead we wage war through prayer and through the Spirit. And in that moment, as we're fasting and believing as a church, nothing happened. Then we had a church planter come in, spent the weekend with us. And during worship service, I was sitting right there during worship service. God spoke into my heart. He said, give him $5,000 for his church plant. So you know what I did? I argued with God. I know I'm a terrible pastor, right? And I said, God, I don't know if you know this, but we're trying to raise $60,000. You wanted me to give $5,000 away? Somebody should be giving money to me. Like, you got this prayer in reverse, right? Answer it, you're like asking me to give. People should be, no, that's not the prayer that I've been praying. So God said, give him $5,000. So I ran in the back, cut a check, jumped up during the service, and I gave his church $5,000. And that set off a move of God in our church that I have never seen. Because within the end of the month, not only did we raise the $60,000 needed, but as a church, we raised $108,000 by the end of the month. Come on. And here's what I know, is that would not have been possible if I didn't obey God. That faith plus obedience equals breakthrough. That when you have faith in God and you obey God, then it knocks down the walls in your life. It doesn't make sense. Give 5, get 100, doesn't make sense because God's ways are not our ways. They're better. I could just tell you crazy stories. Stories like there's a couple in our church, right now where they've been battling years of infertility. And they had almost reached the point to where they gave up. But that night she had a dream. And in that dream, God spoke to her and said, go down to the front, let the elders of the church anoint you with oil and pray that you may be healed. She didn't even know that was a Bible verse out of the book of James. So the next day she comes into church, and what does she do? Hey, I had this dream. Come down front. We'll anoint you with oil. We'll lay hands. And within a week, she was pregnant, and now she got 2 boys back in the nursery. Come on. It doesn't make sense because God's ways are better than our ways. So we trust him, we believe in him, and we obey him. So what is God telling you to do in your life? What is that crazy thing? Maybe it's asking you, hey, give up this habit. Hey, give this up. Hey, let this thing go. Hey, maybe you need to change jobs. Maybe it's time for you to apply for that grad school program you've been putting off for the last 10 years. Whatever it is. Maybe your next step of faith is becoming a member, going to Next Steps. Maybe your next step of faith is just filling out that Connect card. You feel God pulling on your heart right now. I need a home church. I like this church. So come fill out that Connect card and be a part of the church. I don't know what your next step is. We all have some act of obedience. It could be just getting into therapy. Say, what? I have a therapist. See him every week. I have coaches and mentors in my life who speak wisdom into my life. I have elders that are above me as a church. Maybe that's what your next step is. Maybe that's the act of obedience that you need to take. See, sometimes we're all just waiting for the supernatural. Sometimes God's just waiting us to do the natural. Everybody wants to move with God, but God might be up in heaven looking down saying, I'm waiting for you to move first. You want to see the miracle? Walk around that city 6 times, and on the 7th time you walk around, that's when I'll do it. Faith plus obedience is what causes the walls to fall down in your life.